Now we're going to talk about folks who've been released from prison because of COVID. Should they remain so? I think it's a really interesting topic in a couple of different ways. We're going to bring on Anthony Fisher here. He's from Insider and he wrote a column about this. Anthony, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Cenk.
No problem. So Anthony, I do find this an interesting one. First of all, who did they let out of prison? That of course people are going to be concerned. Wait, is it murderers, rapists, etc.? Right? So who was it?
No, it was in fact the lowest possible security risks in the federal prison system. These are people in minimum security prisons, all of whom were nonviolent offenders, all of whom had spotless prison records. Otherwise, they wouldn't have qualified for home release. And so, just to clarify, when you say released from prison, they were released from prison, but they were released into home confinement, where they are required to wear ankle bracelets basically all the time that are monitored by the government. But they are allowed to enroll in classes, they are allowed to get jobs, and many of them did. Many of them reconnected with their families, repaired relationships, became mentors in their communities and their church groups, got jobs, have resumed being the breadwinners of their households in certain situations. So these are definitely the people who restorative justice was working for. They were definitely not the murderers and the rapists.
Yeah. All right. So that's reassuring, obviously, to everybody. And I'm a lib, and I like that. People are back in society in a productive way, and we're not over incarcerating. So those are all good things. But I'm going to keep pressing on some of these things. So one of the concerns I had, Anthony, as I read your piece was, well, a lot of white collar criminals did nonviolent crimes. And so on the surface, the only ones we saw publicly were almost all rich people who were getting released from prison, right? Now, of course, that's a misleading way of looking at it, because famous people are being featured in the news as released from prison, and most poor and middle class folks aren't famous at all. Nobody's going to do a news story about them being released, right? And so, but I do wonder, were there a lot of white collar criminals in this batch that got released?
Well, I actually don't have a survey because it was 27,000 people, and there are currently 4,000 people at risk of actually being sent back, which I'm sure we'll get to. But just in my very informal survey, working with Families Against Mandatory Minimum, and just the people that I reached out to myself, there was one white collar criminal among all the people I spoke to. Some of the people were recovering addicts who got caught up in drug conspiracy, which, as you know, can be, especially when it's a federal charge, can mean a lot of different things. It can be a trumped up charge. I'm not saying it was in this case, but just a long way of answering your very simple question is there was one banker who admitted to me some financial chicanery. Everybody else was involved in petty drug stuff, maybe a little bit of petty theft. But that was the only white collar criminal I came across.
That's interesting. Yeah, I read about that guy, and he now has a job at a company, which, man, people are wonderfully forgiving, and especially for the poor middle class folks, that's great because it gets them back on their feet, etc. But guy does fraud, and you put him in the company. I don't know. I'd be nervous.
Yeah.
But anyways, but he has a job, and a lot of them have jobs, and that's actually great that a lot of them have jobs. And so I'm going to ask one more, what appears to be like almost a conservative question, but I'm genuinely curious, and it's going to lead to something else too. I noticed one person in your story had been selling fentanyl, which actually is really dangerous, right? So like marijuana shouldn't be illegal to begin with, and now in a lot of states it isn't. Joe Biden said he was going to do get it off of Schedule 1. Of course, he didn't keep his promise, and we're going to get to him potentially not keeping a promise on this. But is that a problem when somebody was supposed to serve 15 years and they only served 3? I mean, is there any argument to be made there that that's a miscarriage of justice?
Well, again, it depends on what your sense of justice is. I'm on the criminal justice side of things, where our criminal justice reform side of things, where I think that we overall incarcerate too many people and treat justice too punitively, whereas it's kind of revenge and punishment seem to be more a metric of how seriously you're taking the offense or how much you care about the victims. And there are some arguments to be made. John Paff wrote a great book called Locked In, where he argued that to reduce mass incarceration, we actually are going to have to sentence the worst of the worst to more lenient sentences. Now, that doesn't mean like 5 years for murder, but maybe it does mean some murderers will get out in their lifetime. So I don't know that I go that far, but I do think there is something to be said for particularly, like, say, for instance, if there's a 15-year sentence and most of those sentences are reduced to half with good behavior, so that lops it down to about 7.5 years. And if you're 3 years into it, you're coming up on the 50% threshold of where you could be initially eligible to be released from prison. And those are some of the metrics that the Bureau of Prisons already works with. In the case of the people who've been released from prison to home confinement right now, it's because of a memo that then Attorney General Bill Barr issued at the beginning of the pandemic that said we need to kind of thin out our federal prisons wherever possible. So these are the lowest risk people that qualify for home confinement, and that's how we got here. It's fairly remarkable. We can get to how it changed, but as Kevin Ring of Families Against Mandatory Minimums put it to me, these are the people who Donald Trump and Bill Barr thought could be let out of prison. So they, these are two, tough on crime types. And if these are the people that they thought, deserved a shot at home confinement, then there might be something to that.
Yeah, of course, Donald Trump's not at all tough on crime. If you're talking about white collar crime, he loves it. Can't do enough of it, and will pardon anyone who's done political or white collar crime. But yes, he's tougher on non-rich.
Rhetoric. He's tough on crime.
Right. And so we're gonna get to how Biden can fix this, because these folks could be going back to prison now if COVID's over. But one more thing. But because of COVID, we saw, for example, I'm a progressive, so we say, oh, we got to get free vaccines for people. Great, wonderful, I love it, right? And then people started wondering, and even some conservatives started wondering, why are we giving away free vaccines? Then what we should do, like free healthcare for everybody? And of course, us progressives were like, yes, that's what we've been saying the whole time. That's what every other country does, right? And this is a similar situation. Wait a minute, if we let these folks out that were supposed to serve much longer sentences, and it turns out they're really low risk and they become productive members of society, isn't the real issue how ridiculously harsh our sentencing was in the first place?
Yeah, and I would completely concur with that sentence. That we've only just begun recognizing the damage of mass incarceration, even though we've been now talking about it for years. We, about halfway through Obama's time in the White House, it became a real serious issue around 2014 from Ferguson. But we haven't done much about it. I mean, the First Step Act, which was signed by then President Trump, is a drop in the bucket. It is a good first step. Trump's DOJ actually did a lot of stuff to undermine the implementation of the policy after it was signed into law. But we haven't done a great deal to reduce mass incarceration because we haven't radically changed our mandatory minimum policies, both at the state and federal level. We still treat crime as something that can be solved through punishment. We don't think at all about, that people who've committed crimes shouldn't be branded as criminals and stigmatized as criminals for the rest of their lives once they've paid their debt to society, that they should be able to have a second chance at life. Till we have that kind of attitude for the people that, some of the easier cases might be the people we're discussing now who are on home confinement, but some of the less sympathetic cases, that they might have the ability to have a second chance at life is something that we really need to embrace if we're going to talk seriously about criminal justice reform and sentencing reform.
Yes, and so I used to be conservative back in the day, and there's like traces of it left. So when I see the Norwegian system, and they are so lax compared to us. And I mean, even Breivik, the mass murderer, might be released at some point. I'm just shocked.
Unlikely.
But but it's possible. And he's sitting there complaining that he has a PS3 instead of a PS4 and et cetera, right? But
it's a little light.
Yeah. But when you look at the numbers, their recidivism rate is so much lower. So the people are not going back to prison because they're not going back to crime, which, facts matter. And so it turns out our whole we will punish them and then we will get more justice. No, it turns out we get less justice. So I just want the audience to know that, yes.
Prison damages people, like if you get locked up for the first time, the chances that you're going to be in better shape to resume your life as a productive member of society afterwards are smaller. Prison makes people addicts. Prison, just out of survival, people are, among other criminal elements, and start, new criminal businesses while they're in prison. It's not a great place to sit in your room and think about what you did and how you'll improve your life afterwards. It becomes, kind of an animal kingdom to survive, and it changes people for the worse. So we should be locking people up for not as long as periods of time, and we should be thinking that every crime doesn't need to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law or the fullest, the most harsh sentence available, just to prove that we're taking crime seriously or that we're respecting victims. It's kind of a society-wide thing across the board. Like, I actually, not to use the word, but I had written a column last summer where I basically said you could have criminal justice reform or you could have cancel culture. If you have a zero tolerance look at the world, if you have a zero tolerance view of people, and that mistakes must be punished or you're not taking the issue seriously, then you're not going to have criminal justice reform. They're divergent paths.
Right, and Anthony, finally, let's get to why they might be sent back and who gets to make that decision.
Sure. So at the very, very end of the Trump administration, even after Bill Barr had gone, it was 3 weeks after Bill Barr resigned, Trump's Department of Justice issued a memo to the Bureau of Prisons, which said when the COVID emergency ends officially, so when the Health and Human Services Department ends the COVID emergency at a federal level, that these people who are currently on home confinement can and must be sent back to prison. That's the guidance that the Trump DOJ gave to the incoming Biden administration. It's now been 6 months, and the Biden administration hasn't made any indications that they will change this memo, that they will rescind this memo. They haven't commented on it. Merrick Garland hasn't commented on it. And it's not boding well. Biden's been in office for almost 6 months. He hasn't really shown that the regret that he claimed to have had on the 2020 campaign trail for his long distinguished Senate career crafting laws that it contributed to mass incarceration. He claimed to have regretted that and claimed to want to move towards restorative justice. This would be a perfect opportunity for him to do so, but at the moment, neither he or anyone in his administration has given any indication that they will rescind the previous Trump DOJ memo and allow these people to continue to serve in home confinement, provided that they abide by the terms of their release.
Yeah, so I'm considered outrageous because I say things that are obvious. Joe Biden's a liar. So it doesn't mean he's not going to do it. He might, if you put enough pressure on him, he might do it because he's a politician. But he led on mass incarceration. He was not a bystander. He was patient zero, and certainly on the Democratic side, but maybe in either party. And he was also
he pushed Reagan to the right. There's the Intercept and others have covered extensively how the rhetoric that was going on in the Senate at that time, where Biden, both on crime and drugs, was pushing the Republican Party to the right in the first Reagan administration. Can you imagine?
100%. Not only can I imagine, I covered that story here, and so he's also patient zero on war on drugs, as you pointed out there. And so this is a guy who just believes in his core that the punishment and locking people up for petty crimes, etc., is the way to go. So there's. And he also said, I'm gonna take marijuana off of Schedule 1. And so that's a layup. What you're talking about, Anthony, is the layup of layups, right? They're low risk, they're already productive members of society. Putting them back into prison is crazy. And he still won't commit to it because he never meant it. He never meant it. For note to other people in media, politicians lie all the time, right? So don't, well, Biden said it must be true. Well, so far, it isn't true. Yeah. Anthony Fisher doing a great job of pointing out the facts in this situation from the insider. Anthony, thank you. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Cenk. Have a good night.
You too. Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.